Hello again and welcome back to Ride Rescue. In this episode I am going to tear into the dash of this car. Got some wiring issues. I want to inspect all the wires. Whenever you get a car that's this old, there's not a whole lot of fuses in them. There's a lot of high amp wires that run in the dash of these cars and along the firewall. I've known them to short out and catch on fire. It's not something that I want to experience in this car, so I'm going to go through and inspect all the larger diameter wires. They're the ones that carry the most amperage. Make sure there's no rotting or cracking or a mouse that might have chewed off some insulation. And then there's like the turn signals. I don't know if it's the flasher or if it's in the steering column, but the signals aren't working. There's just some other issues like that I want to get resolved. And then the dash pad, it's got the original padded dash and it's all cracked and shriveled up and just looks horrible. I got a metal dash that I pulled off of the gray car, so I want to get that all prepped and maybe paint it to match, and then I'll keep the original padded dash so that someday maybe be sending the dash pad out to have it redone. It's about $1,000 to have these dash pads restored. So I don't have that in my budget on this go around, so I'm just going to paint a dash for it. And then while I've got the dash all apart and I'm working on all that, once I get the dash back in, then I want to get the glass in. So I want to prep all that. I want to prep the surface around the window and get it ready to put that windshield back in. The original windshield that was in this car had several cracks in it, and the previous owner had started to take it out, so he had cut the rubber seal that goes around the windshield. This windshield was out of the gray car, and surprisingly it is in very good shape. It has one scratch in it that could be buffed out, but as you can see from sitting on this blanket, it is a green tint, which is pretty rare, and it is an original GM window. It also has the dark tint that goes across the top of it. It has a little bit of etching around the edges where it's starting to separate, but that'll be covered by the rubber, so it's pretty exciting that it has all original GM glass in this car. I'm cleaning up all the edges of the windshield now. There's a lot of old residue from the seal that was on the window. There's also a lot of residue around the edges of the glass that'll have to be cleaned up. I did get a new replacement seal to put in, so we'll start working on the glass. One thing I wanted to point out too while I'm here, I'm going to remove this dash because it's all cracked. Obviously it's in very poor shape. It's shrunk and cracked and discolored. It's supposed to be a dark burgundy. But these are repairable. There is a company online for $1,000 that'll repad this dash. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to put it in the trunk for future use. Hopefully someday it'll get a new dash, but for now we'll go back to the original steel dash that was seen in the lower value cars. One of the things I've found over the years that really helps me when I have a lot of screws that have different lengths, so that I know where they came out of, especially when projects like this go for 40 years. But in this case, I plan on having this back together soon. But you can put them in a little baggie, but it also works temporarily to just put a piece of masking tape on it. And I know those screws go in this panel. Obviously the longer screws aren't going to fit, or the shorter screws won't fit in the wrong holes, so it's a good way to do it. Works for me. Well, I think I have all the screws out of this thing now. Let's see if it is going to give up. This still has the speaker wired to this pad, so I'm going to have to get up underneath there and take that speaker out. Okay, well fortunately there was a push connector to the back of the radio, so that made it a lot easier to take that speaker out. Surprisingly, it looks like that speaker might still be good. Interesting to see if it still plays. My plan was to pull the padding off the top of the original dash, kind of like this piece of gray dash, and then the metal underneath is painted that burgundy color, but it's stuck on there so well I'd have to really scrape it off, and I want to keep that original dash to restore in the future. So I pulled all the foam padding off the gray dash from the other car, and you can see there is some rust in there. It's just some light surface rust, so I'll sand this and scuff it up and then get some paint that matches that burgundy color, or maybe even just use the paint that I use for the front fender. And if I paint that the same color as the body and then scuff it all up so it's a flat color, so it's not that real shiny gloss, more of a satin, and that's the way the original dash in the Safaris and the other cars that had the metal dash would have been, more of a satin semi-gloss or even a matte. So that's the plan. But for starters, before I start getting that done, you can see everything inside the dash. There's great easy access, so I'm going to test everything inside the dash as well as blow it all out, blow all this dust and cobwebs out from inside here. Test all the lights, test all the switches, even maybe I'll find a speaker and test the old radio. Heater, everything needs to be tested before I put the dash back together. And then once the dash is back together, then I can finally get this windshield back in. But as you can see, I need to clean up the windshield track. I'm going to keep that original rusty roof. I've decided I like the patina, I like the finish. It just kind of goes with the rest of the car. So clean up all this track and get that glass in, get the dash on, get all the wiring and everything cleaned up. We're getting really close to being able to drive this thing. I've got the signal on. I've tested the lights in the dash and around the car. They all work. But you can hear the flasher, but nothing happens. And that little mechanism right here is where it all hooks up. And I suspected it was probably a ground issue. And sure enough, when I did test these leads, I hooked my tester up to the fuse box for power, and all of these are ground. Everything in here is ground. So I have bad grounds, and I suspect that's what the issue was. So most likely this box is not grounding, or it's just filthy dirty and it needs to be taken apart. So I am going to remove it, and since I have two of them, I'm not worried about breaking anything. But I tested both and neither one of them worked. This one works intermittent. It has one tail light that'll flash, but nothing else. And then I can hear it clicking, but nothing else works when I turn it the other way. The other one, out of the parts car, doesn't work at all. Just absolutely nothing. No clicking, no lights, nothing. So they both have the same issue. I'll tear one apart and see what's inside. One thing I love about these old cars, most of this stuff is repairable. New cars, everything's sealed. You can't take it apart. You can't fix it. You have to just buy new. But most of these cars, most of the parts on these old cars can be pulled apart. And just crimped bent metal. And there's probably springs and parts inside of this. I don't want to go flying, so. Oh, and right away we got ball bearings falling out. Looks like we've got some little roller bearings. 4 of them. And I'm suspecting, hopefully, it sounds terrible. It's grinding and crunching and making all kinds of weird noises. We've got springs and moving parts, so I'm going to be real careful to not have anything flying out of here. Inside of this, it's pretty worn and it's absolutely filthy. There's some old grease. So I'm going to clean that out. What I have here is just WD-40. I had a can that lost its pressure, so I just puncture the can and put it in a spray bottle. A little Scotch-Brite. Get all that old grease loose. Surprisingly, what looked like terrible wear was actually just grooves in the dried up grease. Speaking of grease, need to put a little grease in the bottom of that. I'll use some wheel bearing packing grease. Nice film inside of here. Should protect it, as well as lubricate these parts. I don't see anything broken. Nothing's really worn. Feels good. Sounds good. So what I'll do, I'll put a little dab of grease where the bearing goes. That'll hold that bearing in place. And the newer cars, they would never bother to put a bearing on these plastic pieces. They would just lubricate the plastic and call it good. These bearings actually will roll back and forth between the plastic and the metal. It's going to last forever. Compared to the new cars, you got plastic wearing against plastic and grease getting sand and grit, and grease will hold those in place. And how does it sound? Sounds correct. Everything feels tight. Need to get some pliers and crimp these areas back. I'll put it in and give it a try. Before I completely install this part, I'll just plug it in and test it. And look at that. If I manually switch it, and they both work. Amazing what dirty ground can do. And you can see from the reflection back into the car and reflection on my garage door, I have front lights. And I have back lights. Fantastic. Everything's hooked up again. So let's give this another try. Now that everything is in and screwed down. There's the left. And there's the right. I'm going to turn on park lights. And there we go. For a minute there I didn't think I had park lights. Okay, let's walk around the car, check all the lights. Park lights. Signal. Park lights. Now I know I have headlights, and I know I have signals, but I don't know if I have brake lights. So let's try those. Hey! Left signal. Right signal. Fantastic. I think I have everything working now in the dash. The only thing I haven't tested is the AM radio. I have an antenna. The AM radio is pretty interesting. You can see that panel that's sitting on the seat. That's out of the parts car. This one, next to the AM radio, I have a switch that is called speaker. I can't find those in the manual. They are factory original, and obviously, since the parts car didn't have it, it is an option. Looks like it's a pretty unusual option. I'm assuming it's speakers to the rear, which would be pretty cool, pretty unusual. But I'll have to test the radio and those switches and speakers another day. The speaker that was in the dash was the old paper element speakers, and they were totally destroyed, completely rotted away. I assume if there's speakers in the back, we've got too much stuff in the trunk to be able to see, but I would suspect there is probably a speaker in that screen package tray. You can see there is a screen back there, so maybe there is a speaker underneath that. So now that I've got everything done in the dash, I feel comfortable about putting in the glass. You can see the glass channel. It's got a lot of that glue, sticky residue. It's amazing. The windshield that was in this was the original window. It had the original GM labeling on the glass. This stuff is still soft and it's sticky. That old GM sealant lasts forever. But you can see as I'm cleaning it up, the paint is coming off. I've got some bare metal areas. I think this is actually lead. I'm pretty sure that's lead from the seam, and so the paint just doesn't stick to it because there's no rust. There's no rust at all in any of this channel. So I'm using a plastic scraper so I can scrape all of that sticky stuff out of the channel, and then I'll clean it up with solvent. So I have some primer that is epoxy that I'll brush into these areas where this is bare metal, just to play it safe. One more thing that I wanted to make note of and really point out, with these old cars, the wiring starts to get pretty brittle and cracks and breaks as you start to move them around. Test all those wires, especially those two, the red one and the yellow one. That goes to the generator. That has some pretty good amps running through it. And I almost burned a Dodge Dart to the ground one day when one of those cracked and grounded out and the back side of the dash caught on fire. Sadly, that was a customer's car. That wasn't mine. So that was an expensive fix, even though it wasn't anything that I had done wrong. It had just cracked and split. But I offered to fix it. Luckily, it wasn't a lot of damage. It just had to replace a couple of wires and clean up the smoke. But yeah, really check and inspect all your wires on these old cars. Well, I have the dash out. I've decided I'm going to go ahead and take everything apart. The paint is coming off of around the gauges and along the stereo radio area. So it only makes sense while I'm at this point to just finish taking it apart, clean it all up, and then paint those parts. It's got a gray color, silver color in the background. So you can see there in the background, all that paint is falling off. I was going to leave those that way and just have that rustic look, but it just keeps flaking off more and more. And I have a parts car, and my parts car has these same pieces, and it doesn't make any sense for me to be keeping both sets. So I want to take everything out, lay it side by side with the parts car, pick through the best of both, and then install the best pieces repainted. So that's what I'll do now. Start taking all this apart and then compare it with the parts car. Most of the switches in this car are kind of unique. Typically they're fastened on by all different types of means. Most of them on this dash is on with a little Allen key. The Allen wrench, just loosen it up and slide it off. Typical for a lot of these older cars, when it comes to the light switch, you pull it out and there is a button on the bottom of the actual switch itself. And I'll show you on this one. Underneath, there's a little button. And when the switch is all the way out, if I can get the switch to come out, there we go. You can hold that button in. Hold this button right here and pull out on the knob, and it just slides right out. So that little button locks the shaft in place. Once it pops loose, and it just comes out, so you can see there's just a little keeper on the end of that, and that switch comes out. This one's pitted, so hopefully my other one's good. This is the parts car, but you can see this doesn't have an Allen key in it, and that's the way majority of the General Motors light switches are. I'm not sure about other makes and models. All the rest of the switches, the radio, accessories, those are all just with an Allen key. And then at the base, there's a little keeper that threads on with the notch in it. This is the light, or the windshield wiper switch. This switch was really, really loose, and I was worried that the switch was broken, but it was just that keeper. So when I'm putting everything back together, I'll be able to tighten it all up. This panel here is the shift selector panel, and it's heavily pitted. Luckily, the parts car one, I pulled it out. It's really filthy dirty, but it doesn't have any pits. So when I put this back together, I'll put that nice, shiny, smooth one back in. Now that I've got the dash all back together, got out the steel wool and polished up all the chrome. It looks pretty nice. Got me thinking, wonder if that old radio will work. It's not likely, but it's possible. We'll turn the key on. Hey, I actually hear a little static. Let's see if I can put the antenna on. Huh. It actually works.
I have. If white people were let off the hook, there would be no more affirmative action, talk of reparations,
Pretty cool.
discrimination complaints.
That'll be it for this video. Thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Give me a like. Leave me a comment. Love to hear from you. Goodbye for now.